a dying canine German Shepherd puppy was surrounded by vultures. Until a soldier stepped in. He was barely breathing. A canine German Shepherd puppy, no more than a few weeks old, lay trembling in the dust, ribs showing, eyes glassy, too weak to move. Around him, a circle of vultures edged closer, hungry, ruthless, and patient. Most people would have looked away, but one man didn't. A U.S. military soldier on leave, driving through the scorching Texas backroads, saw something in that pup's eyes that stopped him cold. What he did next changed not only the puppy's fate, but his own. This is the story of how a forgotten canine, left for dead, found a new purpose, and a bond with a soldier that would defy all odds. What happened between them will make you question everything you know about loyalty, second chances, and what it means to fight for life when no one else will. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. It helps us bring you more emotional and inspiring stories like this one. Stories that deserve to be heard. Are you ready? Let's begin. Sergeant Matthew Kane hadn't planned to stop that day. He was on his way back to base after visiting his grandmother in rural Texas. The desert road stretched endlessly in front of him, cracked asphalt, searing sunlight, and not a soul in sight. His AC barely worked, and the only thing louder than the hum of his battered Jeep was the silence outside. That kind of silence wasn't peaceful. It was dead. Matthew had seen war. He'd watched entire towns vanish in smoke overseas. But there was something unsettling about the stillness in front of him now. Something unnatural. Then he saw it. At first, it looked like a pile of cloth in the distance, maybe trash blown off a passing truck. But something made him slow down. His military instincts kicked in, awareness sharp, eyes scanning. As he rolled closer, his stomach dropped. It wasn't trash. It was alive. A small, motionless puppy, its fur caked in mud, ribs protruding like sharp bones, lay twisted on the side of the road. Surrounding him were vultures, 5 or 6, circling with that sickening, patient rhythm only scavengers knew. Waiting. Matthew slammed on the brakes. He jumped out of the Jeep, boots hitting the hot ground. "Hey!" he shouted, grabbing a crowbar from the back. The vultures didn't budge, not at first. One even spread its wings wider, as if daring him to come closer. He charged at them. They scattered, their wings flapping in frustration. But they didn't go far. They knew what he didn't yet, that the pup probably didn't have long. Matthew knelt beside the animal. It was a German Shepherd, unmistakably, but younger than he expected, maybe 2 months old at most. His fur was patchy, his breathing faint. His eyes opened just a sliver, enough to reveal a glassy brown gaze, barely clinging to life. The soldier's heart clenched. "Hey, buddy," he said softly, his voice cracking in the dry wind. "What happened to you?" There was no tag, no collar, just a single tattoo mark on the inner thigh, one Matthew recognized immediately, a military canine breeder's code. Someone had bred this pup for service, for combat, detection, or protection, but he hadn't made the cut. Maybe he'd been sick, or weak, or maybe someone had dumped him like trash the moment he showed signs of struggling. Matthew had seen it before. Pups that didn't meet strict standards were sometimes let go. It was rare, but it happened, especially in underfunded or corrupt programs. But left out here? To die in the sun? Not on his watch. Matthew took off his shirt and carefully wrapped the trembling body. He could feel the faintest heartbeat against his chest. There wasn't much time. He ran back to the Jeep and laid the pup across the passenger seat, turning the AC vent toward him, even though it was barely blowing. Dust swirled around them as he sped off, tires screeching against gravel. He didn't even know where the nearest vet was, but he wasn't going to stop driving until he found one. "Stay with me, buddy," Matthew whispered, gripping the wheel. "You hear me? You're not going out like this." The puppy didn't respond. His eyes fluttered shut, his body limp. But Matthew didn't give up. Not yet. 20 minutes later, he screeched into a small-town veterinary clinic, slamming on the horn until someone ran outside. A young woman in scrubs rushed out, eyes wide when she saw the bundle in his arms. "What happened to him?" "I don't know," Matthew breathed. "But he's not dying today." As the doors swung open and the dog was rushed inside, Matthew stood frozen on the pavement, shirtless, drenched in sweat, hands shaking. He'd seen dying soldiers. He'd carried them, buried them. But this was different. Because in the middle of nowhere, when no one else cared, a half-dead puppy had looked at him. And something inside Matthew had cracked open. And he didn't know it yet. But saving this pup might just be what ended up saving him. The clinic smelled like antiseptic and urgency. Sergeant Matthew Kane paced back and forth in the small waiting room, shirt still off, dirt still clinging to his jeans. His hands were fists at his bondin, jaw clenched so tightly it hurt. Through the double doors, voices murmured, a mix of medical jargon and commands. He didn't know why this mattered so much. He didn't even know the dog. But something in that pup's eyes, that glassy, half-dead look surrounded by vultures, it triggered something deep, something he couldn't shake. The same look he'd seen in the mirror after deployment. The door creaked open. The young vet, Dr. Harper Lang, walked out. Her eyes were tired but kind. She wiped her forehead with her sleeve and offered a cautious smile. "He's not out of the woods," she said, "but he's breathing on his own." Matthew exhaled like he hadn't in hours. "He was severely dehydrated," she continued. "He'd starved, underweight, and covered in old bruises. Honestly, it's a miracle he was still alive when you found him." Matthew nodded slowly. "He's a K9. Harper raised an eyebrow. "Military?" "Bred for it," he said, and explained the tattoo code. "But he didn't make it, I guess. So someone dumped him." Harper's face hardened. "That's unforgivable." Matthew looked down. "I've seen worse. Doesn't make it right, though." She tilted her head. "Are you his handler?" "No," he said. "We just seen the crossed paths." Silence. "Can I see him?" Harper hesitated, then nodded. "He's sedated. But yeah, come on." She led him through the hallway, past rows of kennels and exam rooms, until they reached a small recovery suite. Inside, under a heating lamp and blankets, lay the pup. An IV was taped gently to his leg, and a soft beeping monitor kept rhythm with his slow but steady pulse. Matthew stepped closer, kneeling. The dog looked fragile. Too small for his breed, ears too big for his head, fur patchy and dull. But he was breathing. His chest rose and fell in tiny movements. "He doesn't have a name," Harper said softly from the doorway. "Do you want to give him one?" Matthew blinked. He hadn't thought about that. A name meant something permanent. A name meant claiming him, caring for him. He didn't even know if he'd be allowed to keep him. He was active duty, on a tight schedule, living between deployments. But still, the question hung in the air. He thought of the way the pup had held on, even when death circled him. "Valor," he whispered. "His name's Valor." Harper smiled. "Fits him." For the next 2 hours, Matthew sat beside the table, barely moving. He watched the pup's breathing, counted each rise and fall. His phone buzzed. Texts from his base, from friends, but he ignored them all. He was somewhere else now, mentally far from duty and deadlines. At one point, Valor stirred. His eyelids fluttered, his paw twitched. Then, As if pulled by instinct, his little body turned slightly toward Matthew. Barely. But enough. Matthew reached out and gently touched the pup's head. "I got you," he whispered. "You're not alone." Harper peeked in later and paused at the doorway. She saw the way the soldier sat silently, protectively, eyes never leaving the fragile body beside him, and something told her this was more than just rescue. This was redemption. Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the horizon, Matthew made a call to his commanding officer. "I need to extend my leave." "You okay, Kane?" the voice on the other end asked. "I think I just took on a mission." There was a pause. "Something to do with that dog?" Matthew didn't answer at first. He looked down at Valor, sleeping, healing, surviving. "Yeah," he finally said, "something exactly like that." He didn't know what came next, but he knew one thing for sure. That pup wasn't going back to the dirt road, not while he was still breathing. Because maybe, just maybe, saving Valor was the first step in saving himself. 3 days passed. Valor had survived the critical hours and now lay on a soft blanket in the corner of Sergeant Matthew Kane's temporary guest room at a small Airbnb just outside of Austin. The clinic had cleared the pup for release under strict instructions: hydration, soft food, constant warmth, and minimal stress. But Valor wasn't just surviving anymore. He was fighting. The first time he stood on his shaky legs, it took every ounce of strength he had. His paws slipped a little on the wooden floor, but he didn't fall. Matthew had watched in silence, breath held, as the pup took 2 slow steps. 1, 2, before collapsing again into the blanket. Matthew had dropped to his knees and whispered, "That's it. That's what I'm talking about." For a dog that had been left to die, every inch of progress was a victory. But for Matthew, those victories stirred something deeper. He had seen strength before, but not like this. Not in something so small, so quiet. Valor barely barked. He didn't wag his tail yet. He still flinched at sudden movements, and once even growled softly in his sleep. Trauma, Harper had said, not just physical. Matthew understood trauma too well. Nights were the worst. Valor would twitch in his sleep, little whimpers, body tense, ears flat. And every time Matthew would get up from bed and lay beside him on the floor, his hand resting on the pup's side, whispering nonsense just to let him know he wasn't alone. One night, as the wind knocked a branch against the window, Valor shot up with a yelp, spinning in a panicked circle. Matthew was beside him instantly, kneeling. "Shh, shh. It's okay," he murmured. "You're safe. You're safe now." The pup trembled in his arms, and Matthew felt it. That sting in his chest, that weight. It wasn't just the dog who was healing. He was too. For years, Matthew had buried the memories, the explosions, the blood, the funerals of friends who didn't come back. He wore medals he didn't talk about, slept 4 hours a night if he was lucky, told people he was fine. But something about this fragile creature cracked through that armor. He didn't have to be fine anymore. On the 5th day, Harper stopped by to check on Valor. She brought more supplies, vitamins, bandages, special food. As she walked in, she froze at the sight. Matthew, kneeling on the floor, was gently rubbing Valor's belly. The pup was stretched out, tail finally wagging, just a little, and his eyes half closed in comfort. "Well," Harper said with a soft laugh, "looks like someone's found his person." Matthew looked up and smiled for the first time in days. A real one. "He follows me around now," he said. "I take a step and he's right there. Can't even pee alone." Harper knelt next to him. "That's trust. You earned that." Matthew's face grew serious. "He's still scared, though. There's something in him, like he's waiting for it all to disappear. Dogs don't forget trauma, she said gently, but they remember love more. Valor reached his paw toward Harper, sniffing her hand with cautious curiosity. Then, to their surprise, he licked her fingers once and settled back beside Matthew. "See?" she whispered. "He's starting to believe in safety." Later that evening, Matthew took Valor outside. The Texas sunset painted the sky in deep oranges and purples. For the first time, the pup wandered a bit, sniffing the grass, lifting his head at distant sounds. A bird, a car, a plane overhead. When Matthew called his name, Valor, the pup turned, ears perked, and ran to him, wobbly, clumsy, but fast. Matthew laughed. A real, deep laugh he hadn't heard come from his own throat in years. "You're getting stronger," he said, crouching down. "You're a fighter." Valor pawed at his boot and whined softly. Then, unexpectedly, he pressed his head against Matthew's chest. A small, warm gesture of something more than comfort, of connection. Matthew swallowed hard, because for the first time in a long time, someone needed him. Not because of his rank, not because of duty, but simply because he cared. That night, as they both fell asleep on the floor, soldier and pup, a storm rolled in, and neither of them flinched. The next morning didn't bring light. Thick gray clouds hung low over the Texas sky, the kind that promised more than just rain, the kind that hinted at something deeper. A shift, a test. Matthew Kane woke early, instinct still honed from years in combat. His body knew how to sense a storm before it broke. He opened the curtains and watched the wind whip across the yard, dust spiraling into the air like warning signals. Valor was already awake, sitting at the foot of the bed. He no longer trembled in the mornings, but his ears twitched with every gust outside. His instincts were sharp, just like Matthew's. It was like they both knew something was coming. By noon, the wind had turned violent. Rain came down in sheets, hammering the roof of the Airbnb like gunfire. The local news crackled through the old radio on the kitchen counter. Flash flood warning across Travis County. Residents advised to stay off rural roads. Power outages expected. Matthew looked down at Valor, who now lay near the back door, watching the rain with wide eyes. "We're staying put," Matthew muttered. "Not risking these roads." But staying still didn't mean staying safe. At 3:42 p.m., the power went out. The lights flickered once, then darkness, silence. Valor jumped, ears back, tail tucked. The sudden drop into pitch black startled even Matthew, though he didn't show it. He moved calmly, grabbing a flashlight and lighting a few candles. "It's just the grid," he said gently, kneeling beside the pup. "We're good. Just you and me, all right?" But it wasn't just the power. Minutes later, the wind picked up hard, slamming something heavy against the side of the house. A trash bin, maybe. Or worse. Then came the noise. A creaking groan, wood bending, a snap. Outside, a large oak tree in the yard leaned dangerously, roots exposed by the saturated ground, and it was falling toward the house. Matthew had seconds. He grabbed Valor in his arms and ran to the hallway. Just as the tree crashed into the back wall, shattering the glass door and sending rain and debris flying. The sound was deafening. Dust filled the air. Water poured in. Valor whimpered, claws gripping Matthew's shoulder as the soldier shielded him with his body, heart pounding. And then, silence. The tree had split part of the house in two, crushing the kitchen and back living room. But they were safe in the hallway, barely. Matthew coughed, brushing plaster dust off his face, cradling the pup close. "Okay," he breathed, heart racing. "Okay. We're all right." He stood slowly, Valor still in his arms, surveying the damage. The back half of the house was gone. Glass, wood, rain, mud. And through it all, Valor never took his eyes off Matthew. Later, as they sat wrapped in a wool blanket, the pup shivering slightly in his lap, Matthew lit another candle. His hands trembled now, not from fear, from the surge of adrenaline crashing out of his system. For so long, he'd been the one sent into danger. Now it had come for him, and someone else had been in his care. For the first time, someone truly depended on him. He looked down at Valor. "You're okay," he said softly. "You stayed calm. That's brave, little man." Valor tilted his head, then slowly, carefully, placed one paw on Matthew's chest. A gesture. Intentional. Like he was saying, "You too." As the storm raged outside, two souls sat in flickering candlelight. One, a battle-worn soldier. The other, a broken pup learning how to stand again. Both had been tested by fire, and both had chosen to fight back. That night, neither of them shipped. But it didn't matter. They had each other now, and together, they had survived the first real storm. Morning came slowly, dripping gray light into the wrecked Airbnb like a secret. The storm had passed, but the damage was everywhere. Rain-soaked wood, shattered windows, torn curtains flapping like wounded flags. Matthew stepped over fallen debris. Barefoot, Valor trotting behind him, eyes alert but not afraid. It was strange. In all that destruction, there was peace between them. A quiet understanding, a bond sealed not by comfort, but by survival. Matthew made coffee on a gas camping stove, then knelt to pour a bit of warm water into a small bowl for Valor. "You earned this, soldier," he whispered with a smile. The pup lapped it gratefully, tail giving two strong wags. He looked healthier now. His ribs still showed, but there was strength in his legs and brightness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Matthew stood and pulled out his phone. One bar of signal. He opened his military contact list and scrolled. He wasn't sure why. Maybe instinct. Maybe the soldier in him needed to do things the right way. He called someone he hadn't spoken to in 2 years. Captain Elias Moore. His former commanding officer. Now head of military K-9 operations at Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio. "Kane," the voice answered after a few rings. "Is that you?" Matthew cleared his throat. "Yeah, got something I need you to look into." He explained the dog, the desert road, the vultures, the tattoo code. He described the symbols inked into Valor's inner thigh. There was a long pause. "You said he was a puppy?" Moore asked carefully. "Yeah, maybe 3 months now. Why?" Another pause. "Kane," Moore said, his voice dropping. "I need you to send me a photo of the tattoo." Matthew frowned, but did it. He crouched beside Valor, snapped a clear image of the faded tattoo mark, and hit send. 10 minutes later, Moore called back, his tone no longer calm. "That dog was reported dead," he said. Matthew froze. "What do you mean?" He was part of a classified breeding program, experimental K-9 units, selective traits. Valor was one of only 3 in the batch. But someone at the facility flagged him early for behavioral inconsistency. That's protocol talk for disobedience or fear. They said he was euthanized. Matthew's jaw tightened. "Well, they lied." "Yes," Moore said. "They did. Or someone didn't finish the job." Matthew looked down at Valor. The pup sat by his feet, watching him with complete trust. "So, someone tried to kill him," he whispered. Moore didn't deny it. Matthew felt cold all over. Why would they fake it? Just to cover a mistake? "Maybe," Moore said. "Or maybe someone higher up didn't want records of failure tied to the program. You know how it works, Kane. When something doesn't meet expectations, they bury it. Quietly. Matthew was silent for a long time. Then he asked, "Are they going to come for him?" Moore hesitated. "They don't know you have him, and unless you report it, they won't." Matthew ended the call without another word. He sat on the ruined couch, Valor curling up beside him, resting his head on Matthew's leg like he belonged there, like he knew. "They tried to erase you," Matthew whispered, "but you didn't let them." He reached down and placed his hand over Valor's heart. "I won't let them either." That night, as they sat under the stars in the open doorway, no power, no noise, just the aftermath of truth, Matthew made a silent vow. This wasn't just rescue anymore. This was justice. Because someone had tried to discard a life that mattered, a life that had fought to survive in the dust and vultures when no one else would. And that life had found its way to him, a soldier who had lost his way, and a pup who wasn't supposed to live. Together, they had just uncovered something far bigger than either of them had imagined. The days that followed were filled with quiet decisions. Matthew Kane didn't go back to base. He didn't tell his commanding officers about Valor. He didn't even report the damage to the Airbnb. He paid for it out of pocket and told the owner it was just the storm. Because the truth was something darker. And for the first time in years, Matthew had found something he wasn't willing to lose. Not to protocol, not to corruption, not even to the military he had once given everything to. Valor wasn't just a dog anymore. He was his. But that made Matthew a target too. 2. If the facility that had tried to euthanize the pup found out he was still alive, there was no telling what they'd do to cover it. The breeding program was supposed to be flawless. They wouldn't tolerate failure being exposed, not when millions of dollars and reputations were on the line. So Matthew moved. He packed up, found a new rental deeper into the countryside, something off-grid, quiet. He started paying cash, no names, no paper trail. The soldier in him knew how to disappear, but for the first time, he wasn't disappearing out of shame or trauma. He was doing it to protect someone who couldn't protect himself. Valor was thriving. His fur had grown back in patches. His muscles filled out. His eyes no longer looked haunted. He'd started to bark again, not out of fear, but strength. He ran laps around the open yard, jumped at butterflies, and slept curled at Matthew's feet with his nose tucked under his tail. But Matthew knew they weren't safe yet. He spent hours each night at the kitchen table, documents spread out in front of him, old contacts, vet reports, military files he wasn't supposed to have. He started building a case, not just to hide Valor, but to expose what had been done to him. Harper called him often, checking on the pup, offering help. She'd even contacted a former animal rights lawyer she knew in Austin, quietly, carefully. "This won't be easy," she warned. "If this gets public, they'll try to bury you too." Matthew just nodded. "Then I guess I dig first." One night, after a long day of training Valor in basic commands, Matthew sat on the porch, watching the sun bleed into the horizon. Valor lay beside him, calm and steady. "You've got bite now," Matthew murmured, patting the pup's head. "Not just bark." The dog looked up at him, head tilted. "You're strong, Valor. You weren't supposed to survive, but you did. That's not a mistake. That's a message." And then, for the first time since the rescue, Valor did something unexpected. He stood on all fours, stepped forward, and placed both front paws onto Matthew's knees. He leaned in close, nose to face, and licked his chin once, gently, deliberately, then sat down, eyes never leaving his. It wasn't just affection, it was understanding, and in that moment, Matthew knew. They weren't running anymore. They were preparing. The very next morning, he called Harper and said, "I'm going to take this public." "Are you sure?" "I'm not doing it for me. I'm doing it For every pup they threw away like he didn't matter. He's proof. He's living proof. Harper took a long breath. Then, let's do it right. Together, they began organizing everything. Valor's medical history, his recovery photos, the falsified death report, Matthew's military testimony. Harper would act as the primary vet witness. The animal rights attorney would help them file a federal complaint against the K-9 division at the facility responsible. But even as the wheels of justice began to turn, Matthew knew they'd push back. Hard. And the next time someone knocked on his door, it might not be friendly. But this time, he wouldn't be alone. He looked down at the dog by his side. Stronger, healthier, brave. They were both survivors, both discarded and scarred. But now, they were fighters. And Matthew would fight not just for valor, but for the truth. Because this wasn't just a rescue anymore. This was a war. They stood together on the courthouse steps. The wind was cold, but Valor didn't flinch. He sat tall, alert, wearing a simple black service vest that read, "Survivor, Protector." Reporters shouted questions. Cameras flashed. Matthew didn't say much. He didn't need to. The photos spoke louder than words. Valor's emaciated body in the desert, the vultures, the crash, the healing, the bond. When the case went public, everything changed. The facility that tried to erase him was shut down. Investigations were launched. Lives were saved. But that wasn't why Matthew did it. He did it because one broken puppy had looked into his soul and reminded him what it meant to fight for something again, to believe again, to feel again. Months later, they moved into a small ranch just outside San Antonio. Quiet, open, safe. Valor still slept curled against Matthew's side every night. And every morning, as the sun rose, they ran together. Soldier and Doug, two survivors who refused to be forgotten. Because when the world left him for dead, one man showed up and gave him a name: Valor.